Greetings and welcome to another professional development module focusing on classroom management and control. Today's topic is Tier 2 classroom management interventions, and the theme that we're going to be focusing on today is proactive is beyond reactive. Tier 2 classroom management interventions are what we're using to go beyond our in-the-moment in-class response to disruptive behaviors. The theme here really is, what are we doing after that moment has ended where the disruption has occurred to remediate the behavior so that it does not reoccur in the classroom. These are going to be longer in length, longer in duration, and should focus on substituting or remediating a behavior permanently. You may ask the question, why can't I just keep using Tier 1 interventions in my classroom whenever a student is disruptive or off task, and just use nothing but those? This is your redirection. Maybe you move a seat in the moment, prompt them to stay on task. Well, the reason is this. If a student persists in using a disruptive behavior, repeated use of that Tier 1 response is not going to decrease that behavior. They're still going to do it. You'll still have to waste time in class redirecting them, prompting them to get it to task and not talk. And studies show that if you react to a behavior positively or negatively, that behavior is likely to increase. If you in any way reinforce a behavior, the person exhibiting that behavior is going to increase it because they got a reaction. They got what they wanted. The focus in Tier 2 is to move past that and either teach the student a new behavior to replace the old disruptive behavior, remove the ability for the student to exhibit that behavior. For example, if they always tap on the window in your classroom, move them permanently to a new seat away from the window so that they cannot tap on the window. What we should be noticing here is that the focus in Tier 2 interventions is on a permanent fix for the behavior. Remember, we're focusing on fixing the behavior because the student is not broken. What they're doing is exhibiting a behavior that is negative or is not on task or is not productive in the classroom. It's important for us to realize the difference. We're not changing the student per se, but we're equipping them to better react to classroom situations. So the question was, what's the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2 classroom management interventions? Well, let's clarify. The answer would be that a Tier 2 classroom intervention is intended to resolve a recurring situation or behavior that's been causing classroom disruption. These are to be proactive, meaning we're thinking ahead. Interventions that aim at remediating the root cause of the problem so that that Tier 1 or reactive intervention is no longer necessary. Ideally, the student will no longer be exhibiting the behavior that necessitated you to use a redirect or a prompt or to possibly have the kid removed from the classroom. What we're doing here is increasing the student's skills, building on their strengths so that they have the chance to stay in the classroom for as much time as possible and receive all of their possible high-quality instruction. Our natural next question might be, how can I implement Tier 2 interventions while teaching? The answer is you can't, and you should not try. Don't try to plan these things and implement them while you're running a class. These interventions are going to require consultation with the student, possibly parents, and in-depth discussions that you can't really do while teaching a class with 29 other kids in the room. It's likely that the teacher or student might be emotionally escalated due to behaviors and maybe Tier 1 interventions not working. So to take a break and meet with the student, possibly meet with the parents, school counselors, other people that might be a resource for this at a later date when you have a plan formulated, or possibly when you have a couple of plans formulated. These interventions should be implemented out of the classroom when both the teacher and the student are much more calm and without the student audience of the rest of the class. If you go to sit down with Bobby and explain to Bobby why he cannot get up to sharpen his pencil every 5 minutes, and you're going to make a behavior plan for Bobby where that if he comes with 2 sharpened pencils and only has to sharpen his pencil once per class, well, you can see this gets a lot more complicated than you want to try to discuss and implement with the whole class present. So Tier 2 interventions really are going to require you to take a step back, make a plan that's going to work for you and the student, and meet with that student one-on-one, possibly over lunch, possibly after school, and possibly with parent or administrative or school counselor support, so that you can really be focusing on a strengths-based plan that is going to help the student.
The question begs to be asked, so there can't be too many choices of Tier 2 classroom management interventions, right? Well, the next 2 or more slides will provide you with a large, but certainly not exhaustive list of the possible Tier 2 interventions from which you might choose to offer or implement with your students that are exhibiting difficult behaviors. Remember, the purpose of these interventions is to remediate the disruptive behavior at the root cause, provide a workable solution to a persistent issue, and move on. It might include teaching students new skills. It might include new resources that a student did not have or a parent did not have. It may also require referral to service providers outside of the classroom. By that, I mean school counselors, behavior specialists, if available in your building, possibly assistant principals. You may also want to consult with any support staff that student has from outside of the district, a TSS, a behavior specialist of their own, a case manager perhaps. Or if they're in placement, maybe somebody from the placement facility where they reside. At this point, you may be asking, I guess there are a lot more options than yelling and getting angry. As we're going to see, yeah, there sure are a lot more options. And while that is intended to be a little joke there, these are not interventions that you should attempt to use when either you or the student are at an emotionally escalated point. These are things that you've taken a step back, calmly reflected on how to resolve the root problem, and then you implement in a cooperative way based on the strengths of the student, with the student there and cooperating in the plan moving forward. Let's start to look at some specific interventions, and while I will not be providing an exhaustive description of all of these, exhaustive descriptions certainly do exist online or within professional literature, and you're encouraged to try and check that out before using them. Right off the top, we see behavior contracts. A tip here would be to include specific, measurable, observable goals. For example, the student will complete 4 out of every 5 classroom assignments each week. So you've set up how often will they do it, what is the expectation, and what's the time period in which you're managing or measuring that goal. Behavior intervention plans, you may wish to consult parents, counselors, or school psychologists to help create such a plan. This would be a little bit more comprehensive than a behavior contract that you draw up. You may wish to referral to a counselor. That's self-explanatory. Sometimes students act out because they're not sure how they fit in the schedule and they don't understand a schedule. And if you can provide them with their own schedule and one that maybe is not based on complex language and is more visual based, that will be an asset for a lot of students, especially those with a reading or learning disability. Referral to mentoring, whether it be in school or based in the community, can have a huge and lasting effect for many of our students, especially students in our district who may or may not have an intact family structure. Linking them up with a member from the community to provide positive exposure to recreational activities, educational activities, and maybe explore careers is invaluable. The benefit of specific nonverbal cues for individual students is that it allows you to provide an intervention that you've agreed upon with the student without stopping instruction. These would also work classroom-wide if you can implement them. Also, teaching students how to use organizational tools like planners or schedules or binders is well worth the couple of minutes that it might cost you. I've heard too many teachers say, it's not my job to teach them anything other than my core content. Well, sure, it might not be in the job description for you to do that. However, our job when we have these students in our care is to provide them with all of the skills and knowledge that we possibly can. And if that's going to aid our efforts in the classroom, we should really broaden the range of things that we're attempting to teach. For example, this list starts with teaching conflict resolution skills, coping skills, relationship skills, relaxation techniques, and social skills. While it would be wonderful if all of our students came into the classroom with these rather adult and sophisticated skills, it's unrealistic to assume that they will have these when they show up. So to do our best and provide instruction and remediation for students that either lack these skills entirely or maybe have learned antisocial or destructive versions of these skills, not only will assist us in the classroom, but will assist our community in the whole. So anytime that we can spend teaching students to cope with stress, to engage in positive relationships, to resolve conflict in a peaceful fashion is certainly well worth it. And I don't think that any of us can claim that it's outside of our job description with much honesty. At the end of this list, we see alternatives to suspension, and that would be something to consider in discussion with administration. Teachers certainly don't have that, but maybe that student could do community service or provide a restorative function to the school community instead of being taken out of the community. And you could certainly discuss that with your principal or assistant principal or dean of students, whoever's handling the possible suspension. Last on this is functional behavior assessment, and that's something that can be completed with your school psychologist or possibly school counselor. This is beyond the scope of what we as classroom teachers are able to provide as far as remediation for specific behaviors. I've seen a lot of students have success with a daily behavior form that teachers will report individually on student behavior period by period. This obviously would help identify any patterns of negative behavior and also would show us patterns of positive behavior. Check in, check out with the student regarding the behavior that you have discussed. For example, hey, Bobby, I've noticed that you haven't hit Timmy in the last 3 days. Good job. And he may provide extra information to you based on that. Structured breaks for students that become easily frustrated. This is a good way to allow them to refocus or de-escalate, or even possibly to ease or set up a transition between classes or activities. Forced choice reinforcement survey, peer tutoring, reward systems, self-monitoring, sensory tools. All of these are additional tools that we could utilize as Tier 2 interventions. The forced choice reinforcement survey, you would provide a survey to the student and they're going to tell you how they would like to be reinforced out of a specific set of or menu items that you provide them. A reward system that is personal to the student. I've seen math bucks or behavior bucks where the student can then use that to buy their way into a classroom game, into a prize for the week. Other things that we see on here, self-monitoring would be a skill that we could teach to our students. And if they are prone to becoming angry when they're frustrated, maybe they can report to us when they are frustrated, and we can give them the option of a break, give them the option to see a school counselor. But the first step here would be teaching them how to know when they are becoming frustrated or emotionally escalated. Sensory tools, again, the note here is that it's particularly useful for students on the autism spectrum, might provide a lot of other means. I've seen students self-soothe with these that were not necessarily on the autism spectrum. I would fully recommend doing research and possibly consulting other professionals in the building prior to implementing any of those tier 2 interventions that we just went through. But I do think that that provides us at least a look at some of the options that are out there. It's absolutely appropriate for us to react to and deal with disruptive behaviors in the classroom using tier 1 interventions. However, we can't use those exclusively. We need to know that if a student continues to exhibit disruptive behaviors, that we have to remediate that behavior either by teaching them a replacement behavior, altering that disruptive behavior to make it positive and appropriate for the classroom, or changing something about the way our classroom operates so that that behavior is not an option, or at least is not seen as an option for meeting whatever that student goal happens to be. All of us reach the point where we need to implement some sort of more permanent change in the classroom to ensure that negative behaviors are not interfering with instruction. When this happens, we have a lot of resources to help us implement these interventions. Remember, we're a part of a school community. So I would recommend highly that you seek out experienced teachers and see what they can teach you about tailoring interventions to specific students, what works, what might not work. School counselors are another great resource for this. They've been trained in both intervention and behavior modification. Seek them out. Assistant principals, a lot of them have seen it all and may provide you a new point of view or a new vantage point on how to address student behavior, and their backing can go quite a long way in properly implementing tier 2 interventions, as we know they're more systemic and longer lasting. If your building has a behavior specialist, I would seek them out. This is part of their job. And discuss how to make appropriate behavior plans for positive reinforcement, and let's not forget the value of parents in every intervention and every interaction that we have with all of our students. Please seek them out and elicit their support for maximum success. As we come to the end of this module, let's look at a couple of points that will hopefully allow us to keep a positive focus and maximize our success in intervening in problem behaviors in our classroom. First and foremost, be creative. If you need to implement positive behavior reinforcement for an individual or a group, do it in a way that's going to grab their attention, and the class or the individual student will buy in and feel like they're part of something that is meaningful and maybe even fun. Stay positive. Being punitive, trying to get even, is not the way to success. Remember, it takes two parties to have conflict. Be sure that you're working towards a solution with your students and the interventions, not more conflict. You proving you are right has a limited utility for any student. You proving that you can help that student see things in a new way helps both you, that student, and anyone who is involved in the interaction. In the counseling field, we refer to strengths-based techniques, and we should do the same thing in the classroom. We should really capitalize on what we as a staff do well, and we should capitalize on what our students do well. Start there, build from there, and feed, water, nurture all of those things that our students do really well. And hopefully those growing flowers of positivity will crowd out any negative behaviors eventually over time. Remember, not everything that we do is going to work the way we plan. Sometimes even with the best plan, it'll fail. And we have to go back, readjust, retool until it works. You're only going to fail yourself and your students when you give up. It's key for us to really, really sit back and consider these interventions from a calm, well thought out perspective, with the aim at all times: how can I help this student be successful in the classroom, and how can I help grow a positive classroom environment? I hope that today has helped you, and I hope that you have a wonderful and successful career.